Welcome to Global Reality. Let's get started. Well, in the last 2 decades, reports of organized networks of child abuse rings that manipulate or deceive victims into engaging in sexual activities have shaken the United Kingdom. These networks are known as grooming gangs. These gangs are organized crime groups led by men who target young girls who are often orphans, drug addicts, victims of domestic abuse, or come from dysfunctional families. The perpetrators approach them, gain their trust, and then utilize their weaknesses and trap them into a cycle of sexual assault and extortion. Suellabraverman, the Home Secretary of United Kingdom, claimed recently that British Pakistani men are involved in grooming gangs that target and harm vulnerable English girls.
Vulnerable white English girls, sometimes in care, sometimes who are in challenging circumstances, being pursued and raped and drugged and harmed by gangs of British Pakistani men.
Needless to say, this outraged Pakistan, and the Foreign Office spokesperson for Pakistan, Mumtaz Baloch, immediately responded by accusing Braverman of painting a highly misleading picture and signaling the intent to target and treat British Pakistanis differently. Nonetheless, in order to ensure that offenders cannot use cultural sensitivities as a tool to dodge justice, the British Home Secretary went ahead and launched an investigation into the ethnic origin of sexual grooming gangs. Some social media users immediately shared a 2020 study by the UK Home Department which had found that group-based criminals in the UK were predominantly white and not Pakistani as Suella claimed. There have also been claims that the allegations that British Pakistani men are running grooming gangs is just a convenient dog whistle because UK elections are coming up and it is the last-ditch effort to stir up racial discourse by the Conservatives to recover from the recent political turmoil and win elections. Then why did British Pakistani gangs receive special mention? Detailed investigations into the three most renowned grooming gangs from Rochdale, Rotherham and Telford have a different story to tell. So what does evidence say about the ethnicity of the members of these grooming gangs who sexually exploit children? Let us take a look. Miss Sarah Champion, who wrote an editorial in the right-wing tabloid The Sun, which was titled "British Pakistani Men are Raping and Exploiting White Girls. It is time we faced up to it," was later forced to apologize and resign from her role as Shadow Minister for Women and Equalities after receiving death threats and being charged with industrial-scale racism. Scotland Yard also confirmed that Sarah Champion had indeed received death threats from bringing up the ethnicity of the perpetrators. Eventually, Sarah Champion had to distance herself from the article. The Rotherham child sexual exploitation scandal, which was the first to make headlines in the UK, occurred in the town of Rotherham. Local authorities did nothing about complaints from 1980s to 2010, despite the fact that managers of childcare homes had proofs that the children in their care were being systematically targeted and exploited. This is 3 decades of sheer negligence. While multiple reports with names of alleged offenders, many of whom belonged to a single family, were presented before the police and the Rotherham Council, matters began to sheer a little out of control. And the first group investigation took place in 2010. And five British Pakistani men were found guilty of sexual offences against girls between the ages of just 12 to 16. As a result, sheer disregard and gross negligence and inaction by the police, schools, social workers and government authorities for such gravest of crimes out of fear of being accused of being racist was exposed.
But the authorities failed to protect her. The schools knew, social services knew, the police knew. And even though we all knew, even though we had DNA, even though we knew who was responsible, that man was still never charged with rape.
According to an independent analysis of Rotherham case that was published in 2014, known perpetrators, including 5 people found guilty in 2010 investigation, were of Pakistani descent. The Rochdale child sex abuse ring trial in 2012 and compelling media reports forced the House of Commons Home Affairs Committee to hold additional hearings. This was also followed by an independent inquiry commissioned by Professor Alexis J. in August 2014, which estimated around 1,400 children were sexually abused in Rotherham by British Pakistani men between 1997 to 2013 alone. It was also mentioned in its finding the horrifying rapes of minor girls, girls trafficking, physical and mental abuses, and ceaseless exploitation, and the trauma of being held hostage with threats to life and loved ones, and also reports of teenage and child pregnancies and abortions that had been occurring for decades right under the nose of authorities. Several high-profile resignations, including that of Police and Crime Commissioner for South Yorkshire Police and Rotherham's Council Chief Executive, occurred in the wake of this study. The government then tasked Louis Casey with further inspecting Rotherham Council. Not surprisingly, the Casey report's conclusion that the council had routinely surpassed whistleblowers and covered up evidences was made in January 2015, with some charges dating back to as far as 1980s.
The 2015 Casey report discovered a council in denial, refusing to believe that 1,400 girls in the town had been abused. The report blamed political correctness for the council's failures. Statistics on ethnicity were removed. Pakistani taxi drivers were described as men of a certain ethnicity engaged in a particular occupation.
New appointments of a panel of 5 commissioners and fresh police inquiries in 2015 resulted in the conviction of 19 men and 2 women in 2016 and 2017. Sarah Robotham, who worked as Rochdale Crisis Intervention Team Coordinator from 2003 to 2014, was the first to identify patterns of child abuse. She worked to draw other agencies' attention to these crimes by referring over 100 cases involving teenage girls in Rochdale, Greater Manchester, England, to the police and social services. She provided devastating testimony during the MP-led investigation into the child sex ring in 2012, telling the hearing that the social services team for children at Rochdale had 180 opportunities to prevent young girls from being groomed for sex. But concerned authorities blatantly avoided any investigation into the matter.
I was 13 years old and passed between them like a ball. I suffered rape and threats of violence. What made things worse for me was the attitude of the police. I told them about what was happening. I gave them names, phone numbers and car registrations. I told them about a man who made threats to kill me. The men were not arrested, and I still sometimes see them walking the streets of Rochdale. This terrifies me.
Margaret Oliver, a detective constable who began looking into grooming gangs, was so upset with the way police department was handling the cases that she quit in 2012 and became a whistleblower in order to bring the incidents to the public attention.
I couldn't get any answers. All I was told was that there was insufficient evidence to prosecute. And I knew, because I had been working on that job from day one, I knew we had the evidence.
In spite of the fact that the grooming gangs and sexual assaults and the trafficking of young girls in Rochdale were first brought to light in 2012, the scandal only gained national attention in July 2017 when the BBC aired the television drama 3 Girls, which was based on the stories of girls who were victims of Rochdale grooming gangs. 9 men were found guilty of serious crimes such as sex trafficking, rape and abuse as a result of the revelation. 8 of them were British Pakistani and 1 was an asylum seeker from Afghanistan. 3 of the 56 offenders found guilty in the 2 different grooming gangs in the late 1990s and early 2000s were white, while 53 were Asian, including 50 Muslim, with a bulk of them being from Pakistan. The ringleader of the notorious group, Shabar Ahmed, worked for the Oldham Council as a welfare rights officer. Despite several reports of his sexual assault of young girls, the police chose not to alert his employers for fear that doing so would expose more innocent girls to the terrible abuse. He was later convicted and a 22-year prison term was imposed. 2 of the 9 convicted were informed in 2015 that they would lose their British passports and be deported back to Pakistan since they had dual British and Pakistani citizenship. They filed an appeal against the deportation in 2018 but lost the case. Yet as of 2022, they continue to reside in the UK. The Greater Manchester Police was subsequently forced to apologise in 2015.
We want to apologise to the victims for the failures and the fact that there were delays in the system, which meant, it took us too long to get these cases to court. Yes, they made mistakes, there were misjudgments. Senior officers in particular should have asked for more help from some of our specialist departments. But ultimately, as I say, they were also working in a system that had those weaknesses.
There were 265 allegations of misconduct, with 91 investigations involving 47 officers. Of those, only 5 suffered any penalties. Nobody was fired.
Following this, horrifying revelations from a Sunday Mirror investigation in 2018, which claimed that grooming gangs have exploited around 1,000 young girls in Telford alone, some as young as 11 years old, since 1980s. The Greater Manchester Grooming Gang review was made public just a few weeks before the Telford report was released. Apart from Rotherham and Rochdale, other UK cities like Oxford, where 7 men of Pakistani origin were convicted for sexual offences, including rape and trafficking, after an investigation called Operation Bluefinch was conducted in 2012. Operation Century Scandal in Newcastle, which led to 18 offenders of Pakistani and Bangladeshi origins, being convicted for similar crimes, rape, trafficking and supplying drugs in 2017. Other cities, Calais and Peterborough, have seen similar crises in the past 3 years. Once again, the method of operation is well known and very similar to the grooming gangs in Rochdale and Rotherham. Muslim men, primarily from Pakistan, grooming white girls from vulnerable homes in exchange for food, drugs and alcohol. One of the report's most concerning admissions is that Telford did not look into child sexual exploitation because of nervousness about race. This demonstrates that protecting multiculturalism took priority about children's safety. Anonymity and evasion of persecution because of ethnicity for sexual crime anywhere in the world is unheard of. So what makes Pakistan so special? Even if Rotherham and Rochdale are considered isolated and minority cases, they are still strikingly notable. Only about 8,000 people, or about 2/3 of the population, were estimated to be of Pakistani descent in Rotherham, as examined by the J report. So the 19 abusers found guilty of abusing 1,400 white girls is still a very clear case where there is indeed an over-representation of Pakistani abetting unspeakable crimes. The KC report also stated that minority abusers were from Pakistan and other Islamic countries, even though Western media may continue to label them as Asians.
Rather than improve data collection, it said that the majority of abusers were white. However, the report it based that on found that 30% of abusers were white and 28% were Asian, despite whites making up 85% of the population and Asians just 8%. Clearly, Asians were vastly overrepresented in this kind of child abuse. Prosecutions to the overall population, it showed that 1 in every 2,200 Muslim men over 16 in England and Wales had been prosecuted for this crime from 1997 to 2017. When it came to Pakistanis, it was 1 in 1,700. In Rochdale, 1 in 280 Muslim males over 16 were prosecuted. In Telford, it was 1 in 126. In Rotherham, 1 in 73.
While Suellabraverman's call for action against these grooming gangs is a great initiative and reassurance for young girls waiting for justice, it also represents a welcome deviation from the standard practice of Western media, which forbids any clear mention of a person's Pakistani ancestry, especially if the story is unfavorable. Choosing to refer them utilizing general terms like Asians or South Asians. This is not just about UK, this is a universal pattern where police departments, governments, schools, even international organizations bend over backwards to avoid being branded as racist and will hesitate to get involved in any situation where they can be accused of prejudice against racial or religious minorities. So we now have a culture, not only in the UK but many parts of the world, in which the political conveniences is prioritized over what is morally right and necessary for the society. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and do like, share and comment on the channel. Thank you for watching.